On every side environing them were many hostile cities and tribes of men. Who was there now to furnish them with a market? Separated from Hellas by more than 1,000 miles, they had not even a guide to point the way. Impassable rivers lay athwart their homeward route and hemmed them in. They were left in isolation. Without a single mounted trooper to aid them in pursuit, was it not perfectly plain that if they won a battle, their enemies would escape to a man, but if they were beaten themselves, not one soul of them would survive? Such was the plight in which each and all tried to seek repose.
The novel market was being taken up pretty much by the New Jedi Order. And I was working on my own stuff. I'd been offered a couple of the New Jedi Order, and I decided that the storyline was already developed, and I would be essentially writing part of somebody else's story. And I decided I really didn't want to do that. I don't mind writing somebody else's universe. I don't mind taking plot points, but I don't want to just write someone else's story. I've turned down 2 other projects of that same sort for the same reason.
If I'd been interested in doing a New Jedi Order book, what I would have done, or what it would have pitched, would have been what the Chiss were doing against the Vong while they were attacking the New Republic. And my assumption is they were pinning down a lot of Vong out there. Thrawn against the Vong, he would have won. If he was given, again, sufficient stuff. One of my theories, which I've never been allowed to say in a book, is that the Death Stars were designed against the Vong. That the way I've got it crafted in Outbound Flight, Sidious learns from Thrawn about a threat out there, and the Death Stars were actually designed to meet that threat. But as long as the threat isn't here and we've got these dumb rebels, let's deal with them with it first. But you can see from the way the Vong were set up that the Death Stars would have been very effective against them. So, but again, it makes a nice coherent theory, but they never let me say that officially. And
didn't Aaron Alston rib on that with the nostril? I wanted to say that Aaron Alston sort of made a joke about that in one of his New Jedi Order books, said they would have built the nostril Palpatine, some other super weapon to go against him.
That sounds like Aaron, yeah.
Question about the threat of the kind of large, unknown, but very dangerous threat that is mentioned throughout the Hand of Thrawn, particularly by Admiral Boss Park and so on, the Empire of the Hand, as far as this thing that they need to all unite against. It isn't ever really identified even through Scriber's quest.
It's basically the Vong, but they didn't want me to say so. I kept it fairly vague at that point, and they wanted me to keep it vague ever since, because the New Republic doesn't know about the Vong, doesn't know them by name until the NJO series starts. So I can refer to them, I've got to do it vaguely, and I think we call them far outsiders or something. There have been references, Jir went out there and disappeared, and shows up again in NJO. So there have been hints, but they haven't let any of us actually say these are the Vong. But yeah, one of the thoughts I had is if they've been interested in doing one of the NJO books, the Chiss and the war against the Vong out in airspace, I would have been interested in doing that. But they had enough plot threads without trying to follow that as well. Yeah, I don't know. I might be able to slide something like that into the encyclopedia. That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Think about that, and when my schedule clears up a bit, maybe I can pitch that to the encyclopedia.
It's kind of funny, actually, because the one story that is also a lot of fun to tell. When I was doing the X-Wing comics, I remember it was while I was doing iJedi, I had to do comics, sort of fill in the middle. And I remember Tim called one day and just asked me a question about something to make sure we had a fact that clicked back and forth. And he said, "So what have you done today?" And I said, "Oh, hey, I just created the best Imperial pilot ever," because that was the day that I'd created Baron Fell. And Tim's immediate response was, yeah, I can use him. and so for the next 45 minutes on the phone, we literally came up with the career of Baron Fell from day one through where Tim was going to use him. And, and I typed up the bio, sent it off to Tim, and it was this total, ex officio thing. We were the only guys who were writing Baron Fell. We were working off of this unofficial bio. Later on, I was up at Skywalker Ranch and said to Sue Rostoni, I said, by the way, I don't know if you want this, but, here's the bio we've been working on. And it was like, yes, and so suddenly that became official. But, one of the cool things that we could do, in terms of a collaboration is we could sit down and, come up with a villain, and all of us in our own little worlds could end up, having to deal with that villain.
Yeah. And Baron Fell's an interesting case because Mike talks about us creating, his backstory. Really, it was you doing most of it. You had the vision. All I wanted was, I need a bunch of clones that Thrawn has put down here waiting for the invasion, so when the invasion line passes, we have a fifth column ready to go and tear up their supply lines and backside. But I want these guys to be really not wanting to fight anymore. They just want to stay here and farm. So can you have Baron Fell be, kind of a child of the soil, that he grew up on a farm or something? And in about, the first 5 panels of the story of Baron Fell, you got him working on the farm. And that was perfect. That's all I needed. And again, another logical sort of thread. We've got this hotshot Imperial pilot. No matter what happens to him, when Thrawn's got his cloning tanks going, he will clone this guy and find some use. Well, that's what the use was. And the only thing that would have made it perfect is if that had actually been used in the Yuuzhan Vong invasion thing. And I think everybody forgot about it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Outbound Flight, you introduced the concept that Thrawn knew that the Vong were on their way 30 years before they arrived?
Yes. He is of the opinion, and of course, since he has lived through, now we know what as the Clone Wars separatist movement, he will have seen, at least from the edges, how all of that threatens to sap the strength of this group of star systems that will have to face the Vong someday. And when you look at Thrawn's motivations, of course he's not going to go in for massive destruction. He's trying to build up something that'll stand up against the Vong.
The amount of authors in the NGO series and the development of a lot of the characters that you created, why didn't you do any of the books?
I was offered 2 or 3 of them early on. The problem was, I'm going to be able to write X number of books in my lifetime. I don't know what that number is. I really don't want to spend one of those books writing somebody else's story. So I would not do a novelization. In fact, I turned down other projects of that sort. I was offered anybody heard of the Robot City series? Isaac Asimov, Robot City. There were 6 books. I was offered all 6 at first. I'd be working off an outline by Asimov. And I decided, I don't want to write this story. I want to write my own story. NGO had already been set up, the whole overall story arc had been set, so it would really be somebody else's. And I decided, I've got enough ideas in my own, I really don't want to do this.
I think another reason I would not want to do any of these long series with other authors is that I invariably come up with new ideas midway through a book. And if I'm writing to connect with somebody else's book, I can't use those, or I can't use them without throwing everybody else's timeline and work off schedule. So they offered me a couple of New Jedi Order. I turned them down. They've never offered me a Group 1 since.
I was interested to discover that Timothy Zahn, who did not write for the series, was asked to write 2 or 3 books. Do you have any notion of what he would have been pitched within the series, when that would have been? Would that have been Force Heretic, possibly?
It would have been late. Yeah, it would have been late in the series.
Yeah.
But you're right, it would have been, way up there.
Because I think that's the only, when he says he's pitched 2 or 3, that's the only thing that I can imagine, because there's no other 2 or 3 that late.
Right. But I mean, I think, Tim from the very start has been creating his own series. So for him to jump into, it wouldn't have made sense for him to jump into a series like that. There was really no place for him. I don't mean that as, that he couldn't do it, but he's doing his own thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Hi there, everybody. Welcome back. We're live with Sean Williams and Shane Dix directly from Australia. Hi, guys. How you doing?
Excellent. You?
Good morning. Yes.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Yeah, it's what? It's noon now?
12:30 over here.
12:30? Okay.
12:30, okay.
How did you met precisely?
Shane knows this story better than I do. I got once online, so I let Shane tell this story how we first met.
Well, we both knew this a mutual friend in Canberra, not Canada, who just said to me one day, "Why don't you just give Sean a call?" Because he lives sort of near where I was living at the time,
and we were both having short stories published at the time, so we'd read each other's stuff.
Yeah,
we exist.
Yeah, but we just never sort of bumped into each other, so he gave me Sean's phone number, and I just gave him a ring one day, and we got together for coffee, and 13 years later we're writing Star Wars.
I do strongly believe that I am what I eat, and I read very widely, and I like reading lots of things. My first real exposure to passionate reading was when I was about 8 or 9, and I read Doctor Who novels and Agatha Christie novels almost exclusively. So science fiction grew out of my love of Doctor Who, and same with fantasy. I really adored fantasy when I was a teenager, and still do. And that's why I wanted to write fantasy. I started trying to be a writer
in, what year was it? 1990. I said to myself, I'm going to drop out of university. That's never a good strategy. I was doing economics, so it didn't seem very relevant at the time. I will devote myself to writing full-time for 10 years. And if I haven't sold a novel within 10 years, I'll have to give up and go back and finish that economics degree. Because obviously, 10 years, there's that old Japanese saying, it takes even a thief 10 years to learn her trade.
I've had this wonderful advice. Somebody said flood the market. So back in the early 90s, I'd have 20, 30, 40 stories out at any given time.
I will do anything to make it possible for me to write full time. And that means writing a lot. And I guess really I learned that I could write every day, come hell or high water, when in the late 90s I received a grant from the Australia Council to write the books that changed, the Stone Maids and the Sea books. And I had 2.5 years to write these 3 books. And then Shane and I sold a space opera series, the Echoes of Earth books, and that was 6 books over 2.5 years. And I was thinking, oh yeah, I can probably do that. That's a book every 6 months or whatever. That's not so bad. And I've got Shane to work on 3 of them. That'll take some of the pressure off. And then I got a phone call from my agent in the States saying, I've just sold 3 Star Wars novels for you and Shane. And I said, I've got 6 books due in the next 2.5 years. When are these books due? And he said, in the next 2.5 years. And I said, that's 9 books? 9 books in 2.5 years. I don't know that I can do that. And he said, well, do you know that you can't do it? And I said, no. And he said, well, let's just sign the contracts and see what happens. If you fall in a heap, we'll pick up the pieces. So I sat down and I did the math. I added up the number of words that would be in these books, and I divided it by the number of days. And I worked out that it was about 1,500 words a day, every day, with a couple of weeks off in between books to kind of get my head over it. And I thought, well, I can do that. I'm not going to turn down Star Wars, and I've already signed these other contracts, so I'll do it. And I did do it. And 1,500 words isn't a huge amount. It can be a lot when you're doing other things. If you've got other jobs or you're studying, it can be quite a lot. But this enabled me to write full time, and I thought, well, I should be able to do that in 12 hours a day or whatever. And I got used to it. Addicted to it, some might say.
It's kind of circular because I always wanted to write stories like Star Wars. I never thought I'd have the chance to write Star Wars novels. I read the Star Wars novels. The Alan Dean Foster novelizations of the Star Wars movies were real favorites of mine when I was growing up. And when I started to write professionally and was selling science fiction novels, writing on something on that kind of scale was something that I really wanted to do. And I was writing then with a very dear friend of mine called Shane Dix, and we were writing our big space opera series. And our agent at the time, Richard Curtis in New York, he emailed me and said, would you be interested in writing Star Wars novels? And I said, yes, of course I would, Richard. I would love to. And he said, great, I'll try and get you a deal.
When we published the Virgins books, he thought, you guys could write Star Wars novels. We'll send the Virgins books to the Lucasfilm people and the Del Rey people, and if if they read them and like them, then maybe we can get you a deal. And I got really excited thinking, hooray, we're going to write Star Wars books. And I emailed him and said, have you got an answer yet? And he said, no, just wait a bit. So after 2 months, I emailed him again and said, have you got an answer yet? And he said, no, just wait, just be patient. So after 6 months, I emailed him and said, have we heard anything yet? And he said, no, it's obviously not going to happen.
And it took about a year before an opening appeared. They were writing a very big series called The New Jedi Order, and something went wrong in the middle of the series, and they needed writers very quickly, and they approached Richard, our agent, and he said, well, I can recommend these guys. So I got a phone call at 4 a.m. From Richard, who I'd never spoken to on the phone before. Our business had all been conducted by email, saying, do you still want the Star Wars deal? And I said, yes. And he said, okay, we'll ring this person, say yes to everything they say. And like within a few hours, I had a flight booked to go to Skywalker Ranch to brainstorm what our books would be about. And it happened that quickly. So it was very much a hurry up and wait kind of situation where we were already doing work that fitted into that kind of style. And we were available when a need arose. And then suddenly it happened very, very quickly. And that's often the way it works with this kind of work. A need arises, an author is available.
When I first signed up to do the New Jedi Order books, I read the first 10 or something in a row, pick up the continuity, work out what was happening with the characters. Between books 10 and 15, certain things changed that made writing the first book in our trilogy quite complicated, and then the ending the ending of the whole series shifted as well. So that was kind of challenging, but really interesting as well. It's great to be part of a story that's living and mutating and growing around you, getting bigger and more wonderful. When you're talking about a 19-book series, there's so much room for characters to grow and develop. And that was very exciting.
New Jedi Order, the mega series.
That's right, yes, the series from hell.
It has tons of books, a massive storyline. Like, how did that come to pass, and how did you feel your contribution was?
It was fantastic. I mean, I said series from hell, but I was kind of joking. It was hard work for everybody, and I think everybody came out of it swearing they wouldn't do anything like that again, even though it was an amazing experience and an incredible story. We came into it sort of midway through the writing process. Shane and I had been writing not Star Wars novels, but we were both we both are very big Star Wars fans, and fans of a British space opera show called Blake Seven. We wrote a space opera series called Evergence, which we wanted to be a cross between Star Wars and Blake Seven, so it's a slightly darker version of Star Wars. And our 3 books were out and had done quite well, and they were kind of in the Star Wars mode. So when about the midway through the writing of the New Jedi Order series, I think they were looking for new writers, new people to come into the series and add some new ideas, add some new stories, and we were the people they invited to be part of it. I knew we were part of this series, but I didn't quite know how big it was going to be. And they flew me across for a sort of a brainstorming session in Skywalker Ranch with Walter John Williams, who wrote the book before us, from memory.
Yeah, I think he wrote like Destiny's Way or something just before that.
That's right, he did. So we had a sort of a session there where I was head of the series Bible, which was sort of 2 inches thick. It was huge, containing all the background to the Eugene Vong, all the background to the synopses for the stories. And they said, turn to page 232. Which I did, and they said those 3 paragraphs there are the synopses for your 3 books. Now you can ignore the first 2 because we're not using that character anymore. That 1 paragraph is kind of where it stands. We're here to turn this into an outline for 3 books. So it was a kind of intense few days, nutting out story ideas, and in the lead up to that meeting, I'd read all the manuscripts of the books that had existed to that point, which I think was about maybe 8 or 9. Because everybody was madly. I think it was a book every 3 months, the release schedule, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So there were a lot of manuscripts kind of coming in various stages of editing and development, and it was a huge catch-up. But it was my first time writing in Star Wars. I kind of dropped off reading the extended universe novels, although I loved them earlier. So it was a great way to kind of dive back into Star Wars, dive back into the universe. And the deeper I got into it, the more exciting it became. One of the things I loved about working in the New Jedi Order was because, everything... if you've read the series, you know that the whole galaxy is kind of in a real mess, and it's huge enemies kind of sweeping through it, attacking people willy-nilly, including the Jedi. And one of the things that I loved about being able to story sort of workshop in this universe was that you could say, oh, look, there's this particular planet and this particular alien species that was mentioned by an author, 5 years ago, and we've never heard from them since. can I use them? And they'd always say, yeah, sure. And then I'd say, can I like destroy them? And they'd go, about half the time they'd say, yeah, sure. So I got to kind of tie up all these loose ends in sometimes very violent ways, or sometimes expand their cultures and add new details. So that was a real pleasure, as well as, I remember the first day I sat down to write the first page of the first book, there was dialogue from Princess Leia, and I was kind of staring at the screen thinking, how can I do this? how can I give words to this amazing character that has been in my life ever since I was 10 years old? How can I possibly do it? It was a bit of a hurdle to get over, but I did. So, and it was great fun.
When you wrote the Force Heretic books, the 3 of them, did you write them as like the first one as the first act, second one as second act? Write them as one that kind of flowed together, or did you write one at a time and try to figure out where you're going from each one?
Well, I wrote the synopsis for all 3. I wrote the synopsis on the way back from Skywalker Ranch, so pretty early on the story was set, and all the books were written separately. I was under a really insane schedule at that point. I had to write a book every 3 months for 2.5 years, so I was writing 4 books a year in very different genres as well. So 3 of them were Star Wars, and the other 6 were other things. So I kind of had to stagger the books. So I would do the first Force Heretic book, and then I'd write something else, and then I'd do the second Force Heretic book, and then write 2 other books, and then write the third Force Heretic books. They were designed to be kind of definitely separate books, although you read them as a trilogy. It was designed to be a trilogy, but they weren't written in one big kit. I think they read better for that. I think each book has its kind of separate themes and separate arcs, and I hope they read better for that.
So you kind of just locked yourself up with your computer and just wrote straight for
2.5 years. Yeah, that was really hard work. I'll never do it again. But it was good. I had to write 1,500 words every day. It was a very immersive process and slightly sort of crazy making. By the end of it, I really needed a holiday. But I'm a writer. I want to do. I don't really want to do anything else. I just want to write. So, and writing the Star Wars novels were an absolute joy.
What's the feeling of having written the chapters of the Star Wars saga?
Good feeling. Is it for you, Shane?
Oh, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Like I say, this is something we've both been sort of raised on for years and years. We both love Star Wars. Walking out from Star Wars that first time was just totally gobsmacked. It was just wonderful. I just loved that pure escapism. It was just wonderful stuff.
And I love the ideas. I love the sort of pseudoscience that was in Doctor Who and Star Wars, and was encouraged to write stories featuring that kind of thing. That may be why we have a little bit more science in our books, because I enjoyed that part of those stories when I was a kid. I was 10 when Star Wars came out and was reading all the novels when I was younger, and it's like coming full circle. Just terrific.
Yeah.
It's very exciting. It's very, very hard. I mean, there's a lot of expectations placed on you, and there's a lot of, obviously, continuity and stuff. There's a lot of pressure there, but it's really great being able to put lines in Luke Skywalker's mouth.
And I think you are working on 2 different trilogy at the same time. I was
working on 3.
3? Oh my God!
Yeah. I've been just a little bit busy the last couple of years. After the Emergence books came out, we were contracted to write the Orphans trilogy, which is the second book's just come out in the States.
Okay.
And we're working on the Star Wars books, and I was working on my own fantasy trilogy, the Books of the Change.
Okay.
It was getting quite confusing there for a while.
What was your first impression when you were introduced to the Yuuzhan Vong?
My first impression was that reading through the notes and stuff like that, I was worried they were going to be cardboard cutout monsters. And I really like the fact that as the series has gone on, it happened very quickly, they've expanded and become a lot more interesting.
I totally agree. The first couple of books of the series I was reading, and I was sort of having the same concerns. But by the end of it, I mean, by star by star, I was loving it.
Yeah.
And, you can allow characters like Nominor to be really rich and complicated, and I really like that. Their culture's interesting and different.
Yeah, the concept of having a different a religion type concept is pretty interesting.
Yeah, they're an interesting race and interesting baddies for the Jedi to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're fascinating.
So you said you had been sort of out of the EU universe before that. So I take it you didn't read like Vector Prime before you actually got involved in New Jedi Order?
That's right. I hadn't read it. I knew this series was out there, but I hadn't started it. I was thinking, wait till the whole thing was done, and then, spend a month reading through it.
So what was your first reaction to, Chewbacca's death in Vector Prime, and then, the beginning of the onslaught after that with all these characters dying left and right?
Well, I guess I knew at that point that Chewbacca's death was coming, and but it was still a bit of a shock. And yeah, the body count was so amazingly high. I think the most emotional moment for me in that series was Star by Star.
Yes.
Yeah. It's where Anakin Solo dies. That's the one, isn't it?
Yep.
But it was such an amazing moment. It was very moving, very powerful, and the whole book kind of worked up to this huge, conclusion. And it was fantastic, I guess I knew the synopses for all the stories, and so I kind of knew what was going to happen. But the very best of those novels, like Star by Star, still had that kind of sucker punch feeling where even though you knew it was coming, it was still so immensely powerful.
Yeah, Star by Star is probably my favorite in that series. And it wasn't just Anakin's death, but also you had, if I can pronounce his name, Boris Fillet, the Bothan, leader. But at the same time, you hated him all throughout the series because he's annoying. The entire series. He hates the Jedi, he's going against them, and then he goes out in the most blaze of glory fashion possible.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was a great book and a huge book. It's an enormous book. I think it's the centerpiece of the whole series. The whole series revolves around that particular book. Although I think every book, has its strengths, and I think our books were great fun to write, and I hope people like them, and we got to kill a few people as well, which I'm very proud of.
That's true.
What were your experiences working with the other NJO authors and Del Rey editors?
Oh, they were great. I mean, the Del Rey people are terrific. Very, very hard-working.
Yeah, all around, the assistance we've got from everyone concerned, the authors leading up to our books, the authors afterwards, everyone at Del Rey and just Star Wars in general have just been incredibly helpful.
And other authors like Greg Bear, I mean, he's not part of the series, but some of the work we're doing is touching on Rogue Planet. So it was nice to be able to get answers from him.
But we like to think of Rogue Planet as the number 0 of the NJO series.
Well, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, that's a great thought.
Is it difficult to work on characters that have already well-established backgrounds and attitudes?
Working with Star Wars, in some ways it's easier, in some ways it's hard. I mean, you know what the characters are like. You don't have to spend a lot of time developing them.
Yeah, but even having said that, I mean, when we first started, I don't know about you, Sean, but I mean, I was very uneasy about the writing for these characters because they were so established, because millions of people around the world know them so well.
You don't want to make any mistakes.
No, because you get death threats.
We did anyway, but...
But the great thing about working with the Lucas licensing people and the Del Rey people is that I always was aware that if I did make a mistake, there was somebody there who was going to pick it up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always a hassle going back and rewriting, but you've got to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good to know that they were there to...
The fans will be always there to find the mistakes.
Right. Absolutely. It's been incredible just reading the feedback from the fans to find out the continuity errors and stuff. Despite all the efforts of everyone concerned, they're still there.
What is your writing process? Since you are two authors, how do you split your work?
Basically, we sort of work out a synopsis together, and then I write the first draft, which then goes over to Shane for rewriting.
Okay.
And it comes back to me for a final sort of spit and polish, and then gets sent off. Well, we were a little bit restricted by the storyline. I mean, we knew what the ending of the series was going to be, and had to sort of work in with that. But we've tried to throw in a few surprises here and there, and some of them have stayed, and that's really good. I mean, we very rarely got knocked back by the...
We were expecting a lot more knockbacks actually when we got, so it was good.
You did a great job referencing other Star Wars books in Remnant. You've got reference to Dark Empire, Jedi Apprentice, Young Jedi Knights, Splinters of the Mind's Eyes, Dark Forces, The Black Fleet Races, and many others. How did you approach your research of the Star Wars universe, knowing that it has that much material?
Well, the books we read were the New Jedi Order leading up to ours, but the reference material that we had to browse through, we tended to go through that a lot. Well, I remember I did, I'm sure.
I mean, I did read some of the extra novels, and I had read some of them earlier. I did read 4 or 5 other novels beforehand.
Truce of Bakura was probably among them.
Truce of Bakura you read.
Truce of Bakura and
Rogue Planet.
The Tron trilogy, maybe?
Yep, Vision of the Future, and there was a bunch of stuff that I sort of read just to get feels of things and see what other authors had done. But yeah, we relied on the encyclopedias very, very heavily. We had the Holocron to look at as well. We used some fan-based things. There's a Eugene Bong guide available on the web.
Did you look specifically for some references, or in browsing the guides, the essential guides or any other guides, did you find something that let's put that in the trilogy?
As you scan through the timelines, you think, what happened to those guys? Did they ever appear again, or there's a resonance there in terms of the plot? Maybe we could bring like the Yevitha and stuff like that. I mean, they were a really interesting culture, and they seemed to sort of
vanished away.
Vanish, and yeah, there was a whole bunch of interesting cultures and races that hadn't been back to, and we thought. Let's go back and see what's happening with them now, or how they're dealing with the war, or because it's a galaxy-wide war, it's going to be affecting lots and lots and lots of different people in very different ways. So I really enjoyed that process of finding sort of a loose thread and thinking, let's pull on this and see where it goes.
Yeah.
Some didn't go anywhere, but some went really, really interesting places. But as far as references goes, just going back to that, I think the work of the Lucas licensing people can't be undervalued. I mean, even though we had all the encyclopedias and stuff, there were still things that we couldn't find anywhere. And we'd email people at Skywalker Ranch and say, "What happened to this person? We can't find anything about them," and we get a response, within hours. And they were just superb.
And the Jade Shadow, we had no references at one point, did we?
No.
And they dredged through everything and came up with everything was available on Jade Shadow, which was fantastic.
No matter how obscure, they always had an answer.
Yeah.
Which character did you especially enjoy working with, and why?
Well, we like conflicted characters. We like characters who have dark halves, or they're tortured between difficult choices or put in difficult situations. So, I mean, for me, it was Tahiri and Nominor.
Yeah. Tahiri, I loved that, the whole dreamscape and the development of that throughout these 3 books. I really, really enjoyed that.
I'm really glad that people are enjoying what's happening with Tahiri.
Yeah. It's refreshing. It's refreshing. It's not recycling old characters.
And I think characters need to change in order to live, and she was still a teenager, and she'd been through a lot, and she was still getting over Anakin's death, and I was thinking there's so much we can do with her. And it's good. She's a great character.
And since she got partially transformed in the Edge of Victory, it's kind of a super character to work on.
And Saba was interesting too. But as I wrote the 3 books, I really got to like Jason a lot. Jason's a really interesting character, and I found him quite fascinating. He's a very subtle character.
And he's becoming more of a leader now. It's pretty interesting.
In a really interesting way. I really love what the series is doing with him. I'm very proud to be involved in that.
Near the end of the novel, Palion said to Jason, "You're going to be a great leader someday." Was that something, some kind of a hint about Jason's status at the end of the NJO series?
No, I think that was just Palayon just observing abilities. Yeah.
Palayon's a very old, established character, and I loved working with him. Yeah. Would have liked to have done more with him in Remnant. Yeah. He's a really interesting character. Still going. I mean, how old is he? 80, 90?
It's interesting as well. I mean, the characters we're talking about that we liked, I mean, you go back to our original love of the movies, and it's all those, old characters of Han and Leia and Luke and that. And none of those are really the ones that you or I are keen on. There was always the new characters that we were enjoying writing them the most.
And I mean, part of our brief was to build up some of the secondary characters a bit more. not at the expense of the established characters, but just in order to show how they're going to fit into the new Jedi Order.
But the lead characters, Han, Leia, and Luke, you don't want to tangle too much with them anymore because they have established characters. So.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to sort of bring out the newer characters, not because we didn't like the older ones, but because with the newer ones, in a way, we liked their stories, we felt more comfortable with their stories.
Would you have liked to work on Chewbacca's characters?
I would have liked to have written Chewbacca's death.
Ooh, that'll be a quote for sure.
Well, not to say I didn't like Chewbacca. I mean, we've always liked writing deaths of major characters, and it can be fun.
Yeah, with a sadistic streak.
Yeah.
Well, the meeting I had at Skywalker Ranch, I kept saying, so this character here, can we kill them? And they'd go, no. And I go, how about this character here, can we kill that one? And they'd go, no. It's them to kill a character, and they'd go, oh, yeah, but maybe we'll kill them in a later book after yours. And I go, curses, ruining my fun.
Yes.
But Chewbacca would have been interesting. I mean, the dynamic is very different without him. But I like the dynamic without him too, so... Anakin's the one I would have liked to have written for, I think. Anakin Solo. He was a really interesting character, and it is sad that he's gone.
About Chewie's death, in Remnant, there's a notion about a moon. At some point, Danny.
Yeah, there's a moon that gets blown up by the last survivor of the Yevetans, I think.
Yes, I think that's right. So was that like sort of an ode to
Chewie?
Yeah. Was it sort of an ode to him, or?
I didn't intend it that way. Did you, Shane? No. Just a coincidence.
Yeah, purely coincidence.
So a good one though. We might start saying yes to that question from now on.
I like the fact that they've killed off a couple of the main characters because it makes the readers uneasy. You don't know what's going to happen because having done it twice, there's no reason it can't happen a third time. So as they're reading, there's going to be that sense of these characters aren't immortal, so they can die, and I think that makes for exciting reading.
That was very refreshing in the NGO series compared to all the Bantam books that the main characters were untouchable.
All the other extended universe.
Yeah.
Which part of Remnant were your initiative, and what other were from a strict storyline from Del Rey?
I couldn't answer that question now. I don't think it's all become so tangled up.
Yeah.
Okay.
That, the bit that I'm most proud of inventing, in inverted commas, is the bit with Saba and the slave ship.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that scene.
When they go in with Daniqui?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
Yeah, I really like that scene, and I think that worked really well. That I'm really proud of what we did on that one. And Jason and the Bone Crusher, I like that too.
Yeah, the scene with the slave ship, you really push the laws of physics to pull that off.
Yeah, but hey,
you think of you thought of everything. Okay. Next question. What was the biggest difficulty in writing Remnant?
For me, one thing I'll take away from writing these Star Wars books is that I just can't write C-3PO's lines.
Okay.
I can't do it. I just can't do it. I have to leave scenes for Shane to write because I can't. I don't know why. I just can't do it.
Well, it's hard in general finding things for them to do, really. I mean, R2-D2 we couldn't even slot in there much at all.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the fans of that one complained that needed to be more, but it was like, what are we going to do with him?
Yeah.
A couple of beep there and another couple of beep elsewhere.
Yeah, a little tweet here and there.
Tootling and stuff, yeah.
Remnant has a beautiful cover. It shows Mara and Luke in action, guns and lightsaber drawn. That scene isn't in Remnant. So is it portrayed in Refugee? Was the story edited so that particular scene was forwarded to the next novel?
Can we tell the story, Shane?
I think so. No, it's in the past. So.
Yeah. No, the cover has nothing to do with the scene in any of the books.
Oh, okay. It was a scene that was written that was edited out.
No.
No?
It gives you an idea of how many people are actually involved in the manufacture of each. We got an email from an editor saying, here's the preliminary sketch, and it looks pretty much like what you've seen.
Okay.
Luke has a hand free. We want to put something in it.
Okay.
So is there a scene where Mara and Luke are fighting, and can you put in like a thermal detonator or something like that? We want to make it as accurate as possible compared to the book. I had to email back and say, well, Mara and Luke don't fight together once throughout the entire book, and let alone having a thermal detonator. So you can put whatever you like in his hand. It's not going to be accurate. So then the picture came out as it did. And I love the cover. I think the cover's
Yeah, the three book covers are I think the best of the NGO series, or almost the best. It's made by hand instead of being made mostly by computers like some other covers.
I'm glad you like it. I think we've got the best cover as well. I think it's terrific. Yeah. The next two books, I think the covers come from scenes in the book.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
They've learned from.
Not exactly right there. They're close.
Was there some things that you wrote that you really liked but didn't make the novel after editing? That you can tell us?
There were smaller things more than anything, wasn't there? Just modifying of scenes more than specific scenes themselves.
There was one line that was taken out of the second book that we tried to put in references to all three of the movies.
Okay.
Well, that was in Remnant as well.
Within Remnant as well, we took it out of that.
Yeah, the Empire Strikes Back line, the Empire was always strikes back.
and there was the New Hope one. There was a reference in Remnant there.
Okay.
And there was also going to be a reference to the Phantom Menace, but that got removed.
That one was cut? Okay.
Yeah. Oh.
Can we get any insights on those special cut scenes? Like what they were referring to, or?
I mean, the Phantom Menace line was just in reference to Tahiri's dreams.
Okay.
Something that was...
Some kind of a Phantom Menace? Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Pretty simple line.
Yeah, okay.
But it was too obvious, so...
Yeah, okay. But the Empire will always strikes back. I think that was obvious too.
that one got through somehow.
It's a good line though. It's got to stay.
Yeah.
It's not hard to remember. I mean, we wrote the first draft 18 months ago.
18 months? Oh my god.
And just recently we've been working on rewrites of book 3 while looking at the final copy of book 1 and proofing book 2.
Okay.
So it gets a little bit confusing as to what's in each book. what isn't in each book and what's been pushed backwards and forwards.
But you still got the NGO Bible, I suppose.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but until recently it's been sitting next to me on my desk constantly.
Was there any reason to put so few chapters in the book?
We made a conscious decision not to put many chapters because, in a sense, copying the Terry Pratchett mode, where I find that if there's no chapter breaks, then I'm forced to keep reading.
That's exactly what I did.
Yeah, that's right. You can't stop, and I love that feeling of momentum. Because if you hit a chapter break, it's like a pause, and that interrupts the flow.
Yeah.
It'll flow much better if we don't have it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it came out pretty well.
Thank you. I know a few people didn't like it because of the same reason that people did like it. Some people like to just read through, others like to have that break. But
some people have to go to work. They have to go to sleep and go to work the next day.
We actually got there was I can't remember where it was on one of the fan base sites. There was a comment from somebody which said they liked it because it gave more of a feel of the movies, as in just that.
Yeah, you skip from scene to scene. Or...
Yeah, I like reading books like that. But every time I hit a chapter break, it just interrupts the flow. And we did put some breaks in. We took some pity on people. It'd be a long book to read all the way through in one hit, so we put little brackets in.
Yeah.
Little toilet breaks. There you go.
There are lots of rumors running around about the return of Anakin Solo and the prophecy about the three gods being the Solo children. Are those rumors too far-fetched, or is it on the right track?
Well, this is Star Wars, so I don't think there's such a thing as too far-fetched.
Okay.
But I'm not saying whether they're true or not.
But it's been interesting reading the theories on the reunion.
Yeah, there's a lot of rumors running around.
As soon as the title was announced, it was great. As soon as the 3 titles were announced, I mean, Remnant was obviously going to involve the Imperial Remnant. People were making up storylines from there. Reunion was obviously about some sort of reunion. And it was great. I mean, we were being forwarded all these great speculations, and I remember hitting one, which went for about half a page, and I started reading it, and I just went cold because the first line was exactly right. Exactly right, but everything else was wrong. So I went from going from absolute terror to going, oh, phew. I still don't know. And we're very, very pleased that so few spoilers have got out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fans are really have really a good imagination. So
yeah, it's terrific. I love seeing all this stuff. It's great. Some of the ideas are fantastic.
It's one of the fan base sites, which I won't say which one, but there's been a discussion of the possible developments of various characters and that, and one of the people that sort of posted a message there was so accurate with what was going to come. I thought it was absolutely wonderful.
Really?
Yeah, you should check it out. It was it's okay because it's buried amongst all the other rumors. So
That's cool.
But one person actually nailed it.
It's like that story about Joe Straczynski, who wrote Babylon 5. He used to go around to conventions. He used to love fans come up to him and saying, oh, I reckon what you're going to do is this, because they'd always be wrong. And then one guy sat down next to him at dinner and said, actually, what I think you're going to do is this, 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 and this, and this, and this. And Straczynski just nodded and went, that sounds interesting. And it was all right. This guy had spotted everything.
Okay, so you said
somewhere out, the truth is somewhere out there.
Now, we need to go to the Force.net forums, and there's a post that is exactly on the money.
Okay.
Okay.
But I won't say which one.
Okay.
A lot of forums out there.
How did you like the fan reactions on the web? I mean, Remnant was New York Times bestseller, and the cover by
John Foster.
Yeah.
Was really cool and appealing. How did you react to that? How did you like the fan reactions on the website, the negatives and positives? Is it going to help you to write the other 2 books?
They're already written, or almost.
They're already written. Yeah.
Yes.
Done.
It's too late. Want to go back and finish them.
Yeah, just putting some revisions
Fan reaction
into them.
was better than we
dared hope.
Yeah. Because, like I say, when we first started, we were pretty nervous about it because you're writing for an established, universe, and those fans know that universe 1,000 times better than we could ever hope to.
And we got an email from Walter John Williams saying, when his book came out, he said, I just went to look at Amazon.com. Don't do it, whatever you do. Don't read the readers' reviews on Amazon.com.
Okay.
Yes.
Some of them are really negative, and it made him feel really bad. But and I haven't, but Shane has. He's very brave.
I braved them, and it was very interesting. But things like on the Force.net, where there's a lot of people discussing it and giving their reviews and that, I think we averaged over 8 out of 10 for feedback there. So they're great. We're delighted with such a response.
Yeah,
So
I think the fan response has been terrific, and I've been getting emails from people saying how much they're enjoying it, and that's really cool. I mean, you write stories to make people happy and to give people a little bit of a break from the real world, and that's the sort of response we're getting, and I can't think of anything better.
Now, we gotta ask, what about Jason and Danny Quee? What about them?
What about them?
A lot of people seem to be keen on this idea of Jason and Danny getting together.
It was pretty hot back in the first book in the series.
Yeah,
Yeah, as I
they were
said.
close together, escaping from El Scafor, I think.
Just before we
nothing happened.
Just before we received your call, we were talking, me and Danny, and we're like the flirt behind
and the Jade Shadow.
I was like, turning it on. Jason going to Danny. How you doing?
That's a great line.
Okay.
So it's easy to form relationships in situations like that, but we'll see if they last.
Okay,
Like
Sebastian,
Dana and Jag, who knows what's going to happen.
What are your impressions on the Chiss? Because you'll have to work with them. You're working with them right now. And you have to actually introduce a little bit more of them than what Timothy Zahn did. So, what actually do you think of the Chiss? Do you like them? Do you despise them? Or are you taking us?
Interesting. I think they're really fascinating. I'd love to work more with them. Well, we have done some work with them, but there's still plenty of room.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of room to explore there, really.
And you put some kind of a fear factor in the readers when you said that the Yu Zheng Vong could possibly
have some sort of a contract with a chess, you know.
Yeah. It's a scary thought, isn't it? Yeah.
That's it. It's like, this is our food, don't touch it.
No, they're interesting. We could do lots of things with the chess, and I think we've done some interesting things in later books with them. Yeah, you're right. We still don't know very much about them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Where did you came up with the Galantos Guard Squadron colors, Rosetta, Indigo, Cerise, which is French for cherry? Were you at the hardware store shopping for wallpaper or something?
This is the colours of the ship. And yeah. Look, I love those guys. I'm actually quite proud of them too, because they just do everything the hard way. I like it. Instead of having the red, blue, and green squadron, they had chartreuse, and I don't know. Yeah.
And when I was going over it, I was thinking, this could be sort of pushing it a bit too much. And a few of the comments from the fans was they really liked it. They thought it was really funny, so it was good.
Yeah, it's good. It was supposed to be sort of a bit of a light moment in the middle of this sort of serious stuff, and they're portrayed as in a kind of silly, trivial sort of way in the encyclopedias. And I thought, well, let's just go with that and see what happens.
That was a nice touch.
Good. I'm glad you liked that.
So you mentioned how you were able to go to Skywalker Ranch at the beginning. What was it like to go to Skywalker Ranch?
Ooh, do tell.
It was a trip. You know, it was only my second time in the United States, so it was kind of trippy in that respect. My first time in San Francisco, I was jet lagged. It should have been a holiday, you know. Because I was in the States, it should have been a holiday. But every spare moment, every waking moment was spent catching up on the New Jedi Order series. So I was kind of in this foreign land, eating this great food, and living in Star Wars at the same time. So on the first day, I was taken out to the ranch. I mean, it's beautiful up there. The hills are absolutely fantastic, and it's in the most incredible location, and is the most incredibly beautiful place. You know, I'm sure you've heard stories about how lovely it is up there, and being taken through the offices and being explained not to bother George if he comes up to say hello. You know, you can say hello back, but otherwise just let him do his work. He's a busy man.
Did you get to see him?
I got to see him, yeah. He was eating in one of the restaurants, one of the sort of eating places on the ranch. He was there, you know, kind of 2 tables across. So I've been in the same room as George Lucas, you know, which kind of made me sort of intensely excited.
Did you have a fanboy moment where you like didn't know if you wanted to talk to him, or you were just too scared to actually try to look him in the face?
Well, Sue Rosconi kind of leaned over and said, "Don't freak out," but George is just over there. And I kind of did freak out a little bit on the inside. I didn't know whether to look or, you know, do a dance or just explode. But I just sort of went, "Oh wow, okay, I'm not going to freak out," and just kept eating my lunch. So it was an amazing experience to be in the same place as this fellow who had a huge influence on the world and on my life. But it was actually great. I mean, it kind of hammered home several things. One of them was, you know, how huge Star Wars is. You know it's big, but until you see the size of the ranch, and now the Presidio, and the huge numbers of people who work in there, and the immense sort of materials that go with it. You know, everywhere you look, there was a statue of Darth Vader, or, you know, posters from, you know, Italy or Japan or wherever. So that was amazing. But it was also great to realize that it was not just okay, but it was my job to sit in this room and talk about Star Wars. You know, that was quite empowering, you know. Normally, you know, my family's not that interested. Well, you know, the kids really like Star Wars, and my wife's a professor of English. You know, we don't spend a lot of time sitting around talking about Star Wars. But for those few days, and for several months of the coming year, it was going to be my entire life. And to be meeting people and talking with people for whom it was also their entire life, that was kind of cool. I remember what I was talking about with my editor. She just read the script of episode 2. So it must have been between episode 1 and 2.
Okay. But still, were you looking around for inside information about what you're going to get?
I had a list of people at home who all wanted me to bring back souvenirs, George Lucas's pen or that kind of stuff. Even a piece of toilet paper. One guy just said, just bring me a piece of toilet paper, that'll make me happy. So I spent a lot of money in the souvenir store.
Did you go to Java the Hutt? That seems to be the place where a lot of people like to go, the coffee shop, Java the Hutt down there.
Yeah. I actually don't drink coffee, so it didn't occur to me, but I had a few people have asked, and I feel bad now for not going. I think about a decaf.
That's true.
Oh my God. Okay, so you go to Skywalker Ranch. Is the expectation that you have such a deep knowledge of the lore of Star Wars, or do they give you like a compendium or something?
Oh, yeah, they gave me all sorts of encyclopedias and other books to read. Anything I wanted, I could get in written form. But they also had an expert there. Leland Chee was like the guru who knew everything. And this was part of the problem. When I finally sat down to write the first book in this series, you asked what it was like before, and I didn't answer this question. It was actually really, really hard. I thought that I knew Star Wars. I knew the tone of Star Wars, and I knew what kind of stories fitted into the Star Wars universe. But actually sitting down to write one I found very, very difficult, because I had to ask myself, had Princess Leia ever been to this particular planet? What did they speak there? What food did they eat? What did the world look like? All this kind of stuff. And I could email Leland Chee to ask this kind of stuff, but he's in America, I'm in Australia. I just need to get on with telling the story. And a very good friend of mine, Jonathan Strahan, who I complained to, he said, well, you're making the mistake of thinking that you're writing fiction. And I said, well, what else am I writing? It's not real. And he said, well, if you treat it like writing non-fiction, you will find it easier, because then there are all these references, there are all these sources. You can tell the story, but you can fit the facts in later, like sometimes you do when you're fact-checking a non-fiction piece. And that kind of gave me permission to work in this universe. But I was constantly aware that I was writing lines for characters that I loved, but also lines for characters that millions of people loved out there, and that I was writing for them. I was writing for my inner 10-year-old, but I was also writing for this very large audience of people to whom these stories mattered a great deal. And it was a wonderful fandom to kind of plug into and to engage with.
What an incredible experience.
And an incredible honor too. It was to be entrusted with these characters and these stories. I've been so fortunate.
A lot of us role play Star Wars where we write and we think we're awesome, but usually, well,
it's fan fiction. There's nothing wrong with fan fiction, but one of the first things I ever wrote was a piece of Doctor Who fan fiction. So, and if the internet had existed back then, it would still be out there. So I totally understand it, and I think it's a good thing. I think it's a great thing.
So what type of tips would you give to writers like us?
Yes, please. We want to know.
I think anybody who wants to write anything needs to read really broadly and experiment with lots of things. So you need to write your own stuff, find your own voice as well. And that makes it easier to come back to Star Wars, to write in the Star Wars mode. And it sounds kind of paradoxical. You need to kind of learn to chop out your voice in as much as that's possible, and then write in a slightly different voice. So when I'm writing a Star Wars novels, they're still written by me and they still have my style, but they have less of my style than other books do, because I'm consciously trying to imitate great writers like James Luceno and Alan Dean Foster. I'm trying to kind of soak in, and George Lucas, trying to soak in that sort of ambience of Star Wars, the stink of Star Wars, if you like, just in order to kind of to produce it myself. And it's a very hard thing to define, a very hard thing to say. It's to describe exactly how I do it. It's not like when I'm writing a sentence, I'm thinking, right, this is going to be a Star Wars sentence, so therefore it's going to be like this. It's an attitude. That's what it's an attitude of writing that I found very, very hard at first. But the first Star Wars novel I wrote on, the first draft I sent to Shane, was very different to the draft that came out, because I hadn't quite got the voice right. And every book is different. So I would advocate, as well as writing fan fiction, experimenting with your own voice, experimenting with different ways to write. And then you might find that when you come back to writing your next piece of fan fiction, or, for the lucky ones, a piece of actual official Star Wars fiction, then it might be easier.
Okay, now I have a kind of silly question. When we said, I wish we would have some of Lando's Yuuzhan Vong hunters, I think maybe...
As Australians,
did you have even a thought about Steve Irwin chasing Yuuzhan Vong?
Get a load of that one. Didn't even cross my mind, to be honest. It could have been tempting, actually. I didn't even think of that. That could have been funny, actually.
There are a lot of Australian references in here.
I mean, I could see him, standing by, and he's like, okay, right behind me there's a Yuuzhan Vong. Do not worry. I am going to turn around and touch him on the shoulder. He is going to turn around and walk me down the head. It's all right.
What a beautiful specimen.
As you can see, his nose is broken and his body is also shaped in very different places.
It would have been fun, actually, just to see whether it would have got past them.
Okay.
We're still doing rewrites on book 3, so maybe we could slip them in.
Well, thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
You take care too, and just keep enjoying the book.
Okay, thanks.
Have a good afternoon, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, we're back on the air with Sean and Shin this time. Which part of Refugee were your initiative, and what other were from a strict storyline from Del Rey?
It's a hard one to answer. It's hard to divide up into this was my idea, this was Shane's idea, this was the Lucas idea or Del Rey. I think the whole books are so collaborative that it actually gets quite hard to tease out individual threads. But using the Bakura stuff was my idea. But I don't want to take credit for it, but I mean, it was my initial suggestion. And then we worked on it in collaboration to see what we actually could do. The Chiss stuff was something Shane and I worked on pretty closely. I feel like we added an awful lot to this book. But so did the Lucas people. It really is a tight collaboration.
Yeah.
There were days there with those emails coming in, which all these different people sort of throwing in ideas based on, a query or something like this, which could go for days. So something which was initially an idea of our own would be changed quite considerably by the end. Input from everyone.
That's right, and during rewriting too, there's always things that need to be changed.
Okay. You mentioned in our last interview that it was great to work with Del Rey editors and author. Did you spoke to Caddy Tyer about Truce at Bakura for Refugee? If so, what detail did you discuss?
No, I never actually got to speak to Kathy. I was sort of a bit sad about that. I was kind of hoping to, but it never really, the opportunity never really arose.
Okay, you just read the book and go from there?
Yeah, read the book and the encyclopedias and had lots of discussion with the Lucas people on continuity and stuff like that. It was pretty non-stop.
Okay.
Yeah, I really love to meet some of the other authors that we've talked to down the years and whose work we've used in these books. Writers who've worked with the Chiss, the Sea Rook, all those people. I really feel like we've collaborated with them even though we haven't talked to them.
Okay.
Greg Bear. Yeah.
Very important.
In fact, I've really loved writing that thread because I love Greg Bear's. I've been a fan of Greg Bear for years, and to take ideas that he'd run with and use them in one of my own books was great fun. It was very fulfilling. And again, adding more to it, dealing with Sonoma Sakota as a whole organism and as an ecosystem opened up all sorts of possibilities. The way Sonoma Sakota interacts with people. I'm really not keen on giving out names of people. You might be able to tell. Do you know who they are?
Yes, I know. And appearances from Anakin Skywalker. Darth Vader, if you prefer, but when he was on Zona Masicot in Rogue Planet, so there will be some kind of appearances from Anakin's. Not Solo, but Skywalker.
Yeah.
So there it is.
a bit of a trap, and that's not the only reunion that occurs as well. But these characters that come back in this book, we worked that out when I was at Skywalker Ranch, and they haven't changed. They've always been there, and it's been something we were working towards very consciously throughout all 3 books. And the interaction between people like Luke Skywalker and these returned characters was so much fun to write. I was so looking forward to writing these things.
Reunion is like the culmination of the 2 previous books. It's really
but also, I mean, they're a culmination for both Luke and Jason.
Yeah.
Character arcs, not just through our books, but throughout the whole NJO and before. But at the same time, we can't. These are very, very complex people and very complex lives, and their stories certainly don't end.
No. It will be interesting how the developments through those last 2 books and beyond want.
These 3 books for us, I guess, has been a great opportunity for us to develop a storyline, not properly, but in more depth. We've tried to do some real character stuff that it might be hard in the NJO because with lots of different authors, you're jumping from author to author and directions change. Whereas in our 3 books, we had 3 fairly clear character arcs to follow: the Nominor, the Tahiri Rena, Luke and Jason, and I think we've done that quite well. I'm saying this completely immodestly, of course, but the plot is obviously an important part. But for us, the real thrill has been following the characters of the developments of these well-known characters, and having an opportunity to change them, mature them, haven't hurt them.
In Tahiri's dream, there's some kind of a lizard chasing Tahiri. What can you tell about that creature?
I found something in an earlier book, a reference, and I honestly can't remember now exactly what that was, but it gave me the idea of this sort of lizard-like creature. But it fitted in nicely with the the Cyruk and all of that. And Sean, you mentioned something before as well.
Yeah, for me, it's always sort of been a symbol of her guilt and her primal pain and her anxiety and fears. It's that the idea of a leathery creature is a very primal one.
And the origins of the creature aren't explained. It remains very dreamlike, but what it symbolises is more important than the origins of the image itself. It just seemed to work, and that's why we sort of ended up keeping it.
The conflict between Rena and Tahiri was one of our favourite conflicts throughout the books. Nominor's internal conflicts, Tahiri and Rena, they're running along in parallel, and
we were very happy with in Reunion how that concluded.
It comes to a conclusion in Reunion, but I'm sure it'll be touched on again in future books as well.
Okay. Another question I wanted to ask you guys. There's actually 2 of you who co-wrote the books. When you had to evolve the character of Tahiri and Rehina, did one of you pick one of those 2 and just work themselves up with one character and then fused it together, or did just one of you actually drew the basic draft and then was proofread by the other one?
That is the way we work. I do tend to do the basic draft, but I quite like the idea of Shane and I role-playing these. Shane can be Tahiri and I can be Rena, the nasty one. We battle it out and record it and then edit it back down. But no, it's one draft that Shane takes away and fixes.
Now again, that was something which we had a few talks on, the way that was going to develop. And
he did the dream sequences. Shane was the king of the dream sequence.
Okay.
So I've got to be blamed for the lizard thing.
There's a lot of strong female characters in your book, including the Force Heretic trilogy. Are they more fun to write?
I think women are in general more interesting than men, especially when you're writing for them in heroic modes. I mean, I think women make much more interesting action heroes than men do. Maybe it's because we've seen so many men action heroes that it's kind of hard to surprise us, whereas female action heroes...
Yeah, I think I tried to really balance it in those early days. Just, have the same amount of female strong characters as you would have males, because it was predominantly sort of male.
But you see a movement in the writing of Star Wars. There are more and more female characters in them.
Well, there are lots of really good female characters in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe why we used so many, because there were so many great people, great opportunities there to use great female characters. We did make up a few as well, but...
Oh, and by the way, I would have liked to see Captain Yage and Commander Irulia get into a fight.
When you said that before, I just hardly stopped laughing. It's such a great idea.
Just a little cat fight, nothing serious, but a slap or something.
It's a great idea, There's probably someone out there writing slash fiction about it right now.
Yeah. Are the Danny, Jason, and Jack Jaina relationship totally up to the writers? Or there's a guideline from Del Rey saying they must end up together for the future?
There's a very strict guideline, but we can't say whether they end up together or not.
Okay.
We did sort of take it one direction and they pull it back another. And we can't really say which way it ends up going, but did have ideas about where it would be nice to go. Well, Sean, you had some ideas, and I thought they worked quite well.
Well, we've had a lot of fun with those relationships. Both relationships are very, very different. The characters in them are very different, and charting their progress in parallel has been a lot of fun. I think both Jason and Jane are doing a lot of growing up at these points in the series, and this is just one way they're going about it.
Okay. You described Scylla and the Schiss. But first of all, do I pronounce the planet correctly? Scylla? How do you pronounce it?
Cilia.
Cilia?
Yeah, I don't know. Xilla? That's given to us. We don't know how to pronounce that one.
Okay. You described Scylla and the Schiss culture with a lot of details. Where did you get your inspiration for the Schiss homeworld?
That came from Star Wars Gamer magazine. They mentioned that it was an ice planet. And when I came to write those scenes, I wanted to do something a bit different. There had been a lot of ice planets. So the idea of the tunnels and stuff.
Yeah, the force field all the way, for example, was very original.
Yeah, I was trying to do something. I'm always trying to add something and make things feel a little bit fresh. And the library and stuff was something that we worked out in collaboration. All of us worked that out together.
Yes, the final idea was definitely yours. That was a wonderful.
Well, the Schiss library with all paper books. That was cool.
But it's an idea that I wouldn't have had without input from everybody. You know.
Well, no, I mean the original idea was very different. The original chapter, but
I think it worked out very much for the best.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's a great little idea.
But just an interesting culture, and as far as the EU goes, there's still a lot of space to explore them, and I didn't want to tie everything down. I really enjoyed having the opportunity to take this really interesting, evocative people and make something more out of them, make them a bit more evocative.
But I think your book will have a lot of basis for the future book on Schiss, because you described them pretty much very good.
I hope so, yeah.
But I was wondering something about the all-paper Schiss library. How was it possible for Wynne to create a search program to find system with newly added planet if everything was on paper?
The books can be on paper, the cataloguing can be done via computer.
Yeah.
Or it could be a typo. Take your pick.
Okay.
It could be a remnant of the previous version, but I think also, I think you can still run catalogues on our libraries now, even though everything's not electronic. So,
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It was just a little detail from my part. Okay.
Yeah, I think you're not the only one who picked it up too.
In the two subplot of Refugee, you explain why Condortle and Aris do what they did on Bakura, but you don't really explain the working behind Ahab's action on Cilia. Can you tell us more detail on that?
I think he's working with the conspirators trying to stop the Chiss uniting with the Republic.
Okay.
And by kidnapping Wynne and using Wynne to threaten Suntir, I think he's planning to stop any sort of alliance forming between the two governments.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that's his motivation.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, you said you choose Bakura as the setting for Anne and Leah subplot in Refugee, so it wasn't mentioned in the Bible at all?
No, that wasn't part of the original New Jedi Order Bible. As I was doing the research, I just saw it and thought, these guys haven't been touched on at all. I think they're so wonderful and interesting, and I'm sure people are interested in going back there and finding some more out about them. Luckily, Shane and everybody else agreed.
Did they add another planet in mind in the Bible?
No.
No?
No, we had a fair amount of free reign to decide what to do with the plot, especially in the second book. So we had a really wonderful opportunity to riff.
It's pretty cool for you to have so much freedom with your ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. The writing of book 2 was certainly more enjoyable than book 1 because we were in full swing by then, and it was just great fun.
Yeah. I went back and looked at the beginning of Reunion the other day, just skipping ahead a little book, and thought, look, we're obviously having so much fun at this point. We're borrowing stuff from everywhere and all these references.
And we were very self-conscious, I think we've mentioned before, in book 1. Just easing into those characters, and which is well established. So,
and into a storyline that was very well established too.
Yeah, exactly.
I've actually printed out the Time Tales Fans NGO Bible, which is right about now it's up to 80 pages. How thick was the actual NGO Bible?
More than that. Yeah, enormous. Huge. It had synopsises of all the novels, plus the background, and it was enormous. When I walked into the Skywalker Ranch meeting room and they handed me this enormous slab of paper and said, "There you go, read that." I was thinking, bloody hell, the meeting starts in 10 minutes.
There's another planet that Luke stumbles upon that was governed by a Jedi mistress.
Yeah, in
So
2,000 years.
So, can you explain a little bit where that idea came from? Was it in the actual NGO Bibles, or?
It is. Well, it wasn't in the NGO Bible. It's from the extended universe. I can't remember exactly where. It might be a graphic novel or a YA novel.
Okay.
Which one was this? This is when they're searching through the unknown regions, they come across a community of people that evolved from
humans
that were ruled by an ex-Jedi 3,000 years earlier. And there were pictures of her wielding the lightsaber. Is that right? From the Chiss Library.
Yeah.
This is all stuff taken from the extended universe. This is all stuff that existed previously.
Okay.
I can't remember the exact details. If there was a name given in the book, then you could search on that name through something like Time Tales or the encyclopedias, and something like the references will pop up. But it's actually something that was already there.
Oh, well, that's
I didn't have to make anything up for that.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
All continuity's all intact.
I love how the Numenor understanding of the Force developed in Refugee, even if it is not a big part of the novel.
That whole thread's a really important part.
Yeah, that was
of our trilogy.
That was the final thread that was worked upon, wasn't it? Because it had to be rewritten and everything. So it was very important to
get it exactly right.
That caused us quite a few headaches in those last couple of months, wasn't it? Because it is so important.
So important to the theme of the whole NJO and to our books, and so you will certainly see more of Numenor. I think, there's really interesting stuff happening within Numenor. I think the whole Numenor thread is interesting in terms of the rise of the heretic movement, but in changes in Numenor's character.
Okay.
Not that he becomes a goodie or anything like that, but he's certainly confronting issues he hasn't really had to deal with before.
Are you aware that the audiobook version of Star Wars novel are abridged? You may know that Remnant audiobook only concentrate on the Imperial side of the story and the Refugee only on the Baccaran side of the story. What's the point of view from an author facing that much of a cut from the editors?
I think it's a shame. I can understand why it's happening. To make the books, the complete books into audiobooks would take 8-9 CDs. They're pretty fat. So, but it's a shame that in the first book you miss out a whole bunch of stuff that's happening with Han and Leia, and the second book you miss all the Chiss stuff, and all the Numenor material's gone. And
that's the biggest shame, I think. The Numenor, for me, because at least in the other threads you're getting to sample both those threads throughout the three books and the CDs, but the Numenor is being completely omitted. Which,
it's pretty important, since I suppose it would be very important in the last two books. So.
Well, I think Numenor is a very important part. What happens to Numenor is a really important part of our trilogy.
How much of a Star Wars fan were you before writing a Star Wars novel, and how much of a fan are you now, having written in the Star Wars universe?
That's a really interesting question. When I was younger, I've been reading the Alan Dean Foster novelizations and stuff like that, the Han Solo novels, and playing the computer games and stuff like that too. I used to play X-Wing Fighter, and I was really into them. So the chance to do something like that was taken with both hands. I'm more of a fan than I was before, I think. I love the extended universe now, whereas I didn't know much about it. I was sort of 10 years out of date. And the more I've learned about it, the more in awe I am of the achievement of the editors and the writers and the continuity people. So I think my appreciation has gone up. And I do genuinely love it. I mean, I find myself coming out with ridiculous little snippets of information at parties, while my friends just stare at me. I love going to conventions where there are people who know all this stuff too, so I can talk to them about it. And it's really, it's cool. I like it. It's fun.
Yeah, there is a newfound respect for the writers that I find. I mean, I've not read Star Wars in the past. And to be honest, I sort of just brushed it off as sort of pulpy writing and stuff. But having done it now, it's a lot of hard work, and you really have to respect the work that goes into it. It's quite phenomenal.
The creativity that goes into it. There's so much stuff that each writer brings to these series, and the worlds and the people and the development of characters like Corran Horn and some of the other extended universe characters, Tahiri, are just great creations. Really, really cool. I think the extended universe is just an incredible achievement. I mean, they're trying to tie up all the continuity things so it's one giant story.
It's huge, yeah.
And 70 or 80 years just of these characters that we know. It's quite, as you say, Rogue Planet is like the 0th New Jedi Order book. From that book to the last book, just an enormous story. And I think that's an exciting achievement. And anybody who writes it off just because it's not written by George Lucas is perhaps missing out on something. I think there are some absolutely wonderful stories in the extended universe. Really, really great stories, and it doesn't matter who writes them, really. As long as they're good stories, then I'm quite happy to hold these things up as good work.
The Star Wars universe itself was a wonderful creation, and I think it's just inspired a lot of people.
Yeah, you can't deny the work, and after the movies are over, it will be the expanded universe that will drive the Star Wars saga, I think.
Maybe. It'd be fascinating to see what happens.
I think it'll go for many years yet. There's such a momentum there at the moment, and there's so much to explore. Imagine doing a movie series on the NJO. I mean, that's 19 movie series.
Yeah. But maybe a television series.
They're doing aren't they doing a Clone Wars?
Yeah, a cartoon. Yeah.
Oh, are they really?
It's been officialized, I think, yesterday or the day
2 days ago.
2 days ago.
Okay. I don't think there are any plans at this stage to follow the New Jedi Order with anything, but they will. I mean, it's such an interesting universe.
Maybe after Del Rey renew its contract in 2005.
After they recover.
Yeah.
It's a massive task. I mean, Shelley Shapiro just deserves a medal or a knighthood or something. So hard. And she's had so many people. She stands between us and Lucas Licensing, and everything goes through her. And 3 cheers. Her and Sue Rostoni. They're amazing people.
You're working as a duo, so how do you split your work?
We concentrate on our strengths, I think. I suffer a bit from verbal diarrhea, so I spew out the manuscript very, very quickly, and it's very rough and very... it needs lots of work, but luckily I can just spew it all out and then pass it across to Shane, who gets to do all the dirty work.
all the fun work, I find it, but the last few years have been like production line, and it's worked perfectly for the two of us, in that Sean was able to get these chapters out very quickly to me and get me working on them, and allowed him to go to his solo books in between. So you pumped out a lot of work.
Yeah, despite that, I don't think the quality was. I think what we wrote was pretty good. I was really worried that we'd be turning out an enormous amount of junk, but the books have done really well. Both the Star Wars and non-Star Wars books. They're very happy with it.
Now you are, just making a transition, you are also an avid music lover. You're a composer in your own right, and I'm very curious. What do you listen to when you're writing?
So I listen to a lot of soundtrack material. Nothing that's too loud or intrusive. I like to have music on that has a kind of energy or a structure or rhythm to it without being too boomy or intrusive. It won't get in the way. When I first started writing Star Wars novels, I thought, fantastic, I can dig out all my soundtracks and listen to them. And I put on the soundtrack to Episode 4, wonderful soundtrack. In fact, the first record I ever owned. I found it, I couldn't write to it. I couldn't write even a Star Wars novel to it. I found it was just a bit too... I kept getting carried away by the music and distracted.
Interesting.
Which is a shame, yeah. Probably for the best, though. I think having written now 6 Star Wars novels, I think I would have worn those CDs out. And probably learned to not like them quite so much, having played them over many times. Yeah. Back when in the early days of being able to rip CDs onto your computer, I went through all my soundtrack collection and ripped out all my favorite relatively quiet bits and had a huge playlist that would just play at random, hundreds of hours of music, which was fantastic. I think Alien partly is a sentimental favourite. It's a wonderfully aggressively primal score with all sorts of weird instruments, and sounds like he's playing trumpets underwater at one point, and it's so complexly rhythmic and atonal that I'd never really heard anything quite like it before. I was used to the John Williams style scores from Star Wars. One of my other favourite scores, in a similar kind of vein, is Ennio Morricone's score to The Thing. Which I really love for similar reasons, but it's a bit more lyrical and haunting, and it's very hard to capture in words why I love that so much.
And this one a lot of fun, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Danny. It's been great fun.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
And we're back on the air with Sean Williams, the author of Force Heretic.
Half of the author of...
yeah.
Welcome, Sean.
Thanks a lot. Shane sends his apologies. Australia is a plague-ridden continent at the moment. So he's sick and I'm sick, and he's in bed somewhere.
If you consider the Force Heretic trilogy as a whole, how did you approach the writing, the direction you took for each book, the research, etc.?
Each book was a little bit different. It was different research tasks for each one. Certainly with the second book, we had to really concentrate on the Chiss and try and add stuff to fairly sketchy references and try and flesh it out in character without adding too much as well, because we wanted to leave lots of other room for other authors to riff on that race. I don't know, the third book was easier in some ways because we got to make up the whole Osandia stuff, and we got to make up our own planet, our own race, whereas the previous two books we were using lots of existing races and histories like Bakura and the Imperial Remnant and cultures like that. But I think with the third book I guess my feeling is that we got better as the three books went on.
Okay, so you designed the trilogy book by book and not having a basic storyline at
we
the
knew exactly
start.
what the storyline would be. We knew exactly what the end would be.
Okay.
We after the brainstorming session in Skywalker Ranch, before we'd even started writing the books, before we even had the titles, we knew exactly what the final scene would be on Zanama's Coat. We knew exactly where we had to be on that.
Okay.
So we knew where each book would begin and end.
Between the start and the end, did you write a timeline, a storyline for the three books?
Yeah, no, we knew what would be in each book. Yeah,
okay.
Started writing. We knew, maybe not some of the details, I enjoyed writing the third book because there was lots of room for chase sequences and fight sequences, and some of the battles that were happening on Osandia were great fun to write. And weren't in the original synopsis, but just came out of the actual writing. And I think fight sequences work well that way. It's much more fun to sit down and work it out as it happens than to plan it bit by bit and then just write it down. For me, anyway.
The title of the trilogy is Force Heretic, but after reading the three novels, there's not much things said about those heretic. We know that the movement is getting bigger and stronger, but nothing more. Any reason why this title, Force Heretic, was chosen instead of something related to the search of Zona Masicot, for example?
Well, there is a tangential reference to, from some points of view, Jason could be a Force Heretic.
Okay.
In that he comes to a slightly different conclusion to Luke.
Yeah, okay.
When Zona Masicot makes its offer. So in some ways he and Luke disagree. And given that they're probably the two most important people as far as the philosophy of the Jedi goes at the moment. So one could argue that Jason is sort of maybe heading towards being a bit of a Force Heretic. He's certainly been running counter to the flow throughout the series a little bit anyway.
And maybe Tahiri also could be a Force Heretic.
Tahiri could be a Force Heretic
in the
as well.
same type of way.
And yeah, of course, Nominor. So again, it was a title that sort of had a very strong reference to Nominor, but also had these little other echoes to the other story threads as well, Tahiri and Jason. So it seemed like a good title.
The role of Jason in Reunion and the entire Force Heretic trilogy seems to indicate that you will probably be the Master Jedi once Luke is gone. Is that the idea, the basic idea?
Well, I think to me, he's the one who is thinking most deeply at the moment about what the Force is and about what the role of the Jedi is with respect to the Force. So he, I think, is... Whereas Jaina is kind of a practitioner Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
She's out there getting down and dirty, and she's using the Force as a tool.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, I think, is a bit more thoughtful in that he's trying to work out exactly where everything sort of fits together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my take on it anyway is that I think you need somebody like that at the heart of any sort of organization.
Yeah, Jaina is the more classic Jedi, and Jason is more like a Jedi Council member type of Jedi.
Yeah, I think so. I sort of, and a bit more Obi-Wan-ish as well.
Yeah, okay.
Really thinking very carefully about stuff, and philosophy is very important to him. I mean, I guess his first reaction isn't to whip out his lightsaber or to use a Jedi mind trick. There's something a bit more compassionate or a bit more thoughtful about, a bit more spiritual about him, which maybe would make him a perfect Jedi master, sort of leader of the new Jedi Order. Maybe. Luke's still there. Luke's still around. He's not necessarily going anywhere.
So far.
Yeah, so far.
No, exactly. There's always that little caveat.
Jason seems to be different from what Matthew Stover and Walter John Williams described. Was that
written on purpose?
Yeah, written on purpose.
I think it's one of those cases where different writers write in different ways, and I like to think that he's still developing as a person, and he's trying different means to find a solution.
He still doesn't want a war. He wants a peaceful solution. But we saw him using his lightsaber and killing people in Destiny's Way and Traitor, so...
I guess it's hard to try and find a peaceful solution when you are cutting people up with a lightsaber. I don't know. He's still working himself out, and I know he will. He'll get there in the end.
A lot of fans are anxious to see Danny, Kui, and Jason get together. Is there a reason for this relationship to be this slow to develop, besides Jason being completely blind?
Does it develop any further? I can't say. Jason's going through some difficult times, and he's trying to work out what being a Jedi is all about too. And I guess he's still sort of in the process of trying to work out exactly what everything is for him and where he's going to fit in. And
So he got more important matter to think about, probably.
Maybe, yeah. There is some serious stuff going down in the NJO universe. Jason
is mentioning that there's probably another solution to war. Would the Force Heretics, the Nomanor group, be the other solution to the war that Jason is feeling, besides using Alpha Red or Zona Masicot?
Well, it's certainly a possibility. I mean, I guess I'm not saying this is what will happen, but if the Zona Masicot sort of resistance group, Heresy, ever did manage to become a significant power within the Yuuzhan Vong and did manage to actually contact the Jedi, there would be significant tactical opportunities for the Jedi in that, eating away at the Yuuzhan Vong from within. But would they trust Nominor? I mean, if Nominor got in touch with Luke and said, let's form an alliance, I don't know whether Luke would trust him too far.
Yeah. Not after what he did to Mara.
Well, exactly, that's right. And I think we know that Nominor's kind of doing this really for himself. He's not doing it because he's suddenly a good person.
No.
Still not very nice at all. Sort of like the idea that Nominor might have got forced into fighting on the side of the Jedi, even though he still hated the Jedi. But who knows? That's for future books to reveal.
Yeah. Does events in the world affect the way authors are writing stories these days?
Like world wars going all around the place, or just...
Yeah, I don't know. It's sort of hard. You don't want to... I mean, I do feel very strongly about these issues, but there are ways of introducing these issues into books without being too obvious about it. I don't like books that are obviously didactic, that they have a real message to sort of hammer home, but I like books that will discuss and explore things in an interesting, thought-provoking way. So whenever I feel compelled to discuss these issues, I guess I tend to err on the pacifist side. So I
guess I understand Jason's viewpoint a little bit better than Jaina's, for instance. So
yeah, that's a thing that Star Wars fan reading your book, I saw on the Force.net boards. They're debating about going to not to do genocide with the Yuuzhan Vong, and there's other people that say, let's kill them all, and you can compare this to real life. There are people that think that way and other people that think the other way, and
well, yeah, I mean, these are really real issues, and that's the good thing about this series, and why it's so well timed, I guess, because these are issues that we're all thinking about, and I don't think there are any absolute rights or wrongs, and that's why I really like characters like Jacen and Tahiri, who, I mean, Jason's doing something that a lot of people would find difficult to understand. I mean, he's trying to find a way of finding a peaceful solution to war, with a peaceful sort of way of coexisting with a race that's caused death to so many people, and including his own brother. A lot of people would find that really abhorrent, and but it's interesting that he's still trying. And Tahiri, who is, you know, at least nominally, I guess, half enemy, half good guy. Where does she fit into the scheme of things? I think these sorts of ambiguities are really good to explore in fiction because they happen in real life too.
I think Tahiri could be the best leader for the heretic and the Jedi because she's both. Let's see.
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously I can't say, but I think she's superbly qualified for a really important role.
Yeah.
In anything. I mean, if she wants it, I don't know what she's going to want to do.
The new Tahiri, after coming out of her coma, declares some kind of a life debt to Jaina and the Solos. Was that in honor of Chewbacca?
Oh, well, you know, perhaps a subconscious tribute. I think Tahiri was certainly one of our favourite characters throughout this trilogy, and I love the idea that she is inventing her own traditions, which are combinations of the traditions that Tahiri used to have, plus the traditions that Rena used to have, and Jaina has certainly helped her fashion herself into a new being. So I think there is a very, very strong debt there. Whether it manifests exactly the same way that Chewbacca's did, we shall see.
Yeah, we shall see in the next.
I'm dying to see what happens in the next couple of books with her and beyond. I think she's a wonderful character, and I'm certainly hoping that she will continue on beyond these series. I think she deserves books of her own.
That's true. Would you like to write it?
Oh, I'd love to. Shannon and I had just a wonderful time working with her character and working with the people at licensing on her character as well. She was very much a collaborative venture on all behalf, and she's kind of a symbol, you know, I mean, of what Luke's trying to do. Luke doesn't want to destroy the Yuuzhan Vong, and I guess she's kind of a sign that there may be a way of bringing the enemies together. She's the Yuuzhan Vong and humanity sort of combined into one person, and if she can keep it together, then maybe there's hope for peace rather than decimation on either side.
With the new birth of Tahiri, how do you see the character develop in the two remaining books? Since she's a mix of Jedi and Vong, is she the most powerful weapon against the Yuuzhan Vong?
Obviously, I can't give anything too much away.
Okay.
And to be honest, I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what Greg and the other writers are doing with her, but I will be looking forward to seeing. Yeah. This was certainly something that we developed in the course of our 3 books. That I don't think was in the original Bible.
Yeah, and since the future of the Bible is always in movement, maybe they decided to go the other way with Tahiri and give her comic books, her own novels and stuff like that. So.
Hey, a comic book with Tahiri, that'd be cool.
Oh yes.
That'd be great. I'd love to work on that.
Tahiri is wearing shoes now.
Exactly, yeah.
Was
that time she started putting shoes on.
Was that a way for you to signify her big transformation in an original way?
Yeah, it was certainly a nod to readers of the original Tahiri who would have certainly known that she didn't like wearing shoes would go, oh, this is different. And we were looking for little ways to do that. Her handedness, I think, whether she was left-handed or right-handed, I think we threw in a mention of that too. But the fact that she was wearing shoes is a clear way of signalling that this is a slightly different person. She's still calling herself Tahiri, but there are significant differences there. She's still working out exactly who she is. But one of the new things the new Tahiri likes is wearing shoes.
Okay.
We'll see what happens. Maybe that'll change. Maybe we should go back to wearing no shoes.
Yeah. At the beginning of Reunion, there's a classic Han Solo type of scene. The old scoundrel in a bar playing Sabak. I figure you and Shane had fun writing that scene. Were you big Han Solo fan growing?
Oh, yeah. I wrote the scene. I didn't tell Shane what I was doing. I wrote the scene and sent it to him, hoping that he'd really like it. Because I love the idea. As you say, it's sort of a tribute to the old guy.
Yeah.
But back to his bad old days and calling on his Sabak skills. They're not called on very often anymore, so it was nice to be able to go back and not just show him as he used to be, but also to show Sabak in slightly a new light.
Yeah.
I was very relieved when Shane rang him the next day after I'd emailed it to him and said, I love it, it's great.
Yeah. Who developed this new kind of Sabak?
Oh, that was me. I like maths.
Yeah, I see that.
23 is my favorite number, so I've always wanted to do something with Sabak and...
the cubic, I don't remember what the...
Yeah, I thought, and imaginary numbers, I thought, well, why not? I mean, you've got races like the Given who are so good with maths.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, well, they're gonna be mucking around with the rules. Let's see what they can do.
Yeah.
I was a little bit worried that it might not stay in the final draft, but it didn't. I was very, very pleased. I think it's one of my favorite scenes in the entire series.
Yeah, Droma being the leader of the Rin network, it was in the Agent of Chaos duology. It's from James Luceno.
Jim Luceno, that's right. One of the big concerns for us was when we brought Droma back, was we had to make Droma sound like Jim's excellent excellent writing of Droma, and we had him on standby, ready to rewrite our scenes if we couldn't write Droma as well as he did. But luckily, we didn't need him. We managed to nail Droma. Droma was the best known Rin character, and he was an interesting guy, and yeah.
Besides the novel Rogue Planet, where did you find your inspiration for the landscape, fauna, and wildlife of Zona Masicot?
Well, we most of it came from Rogue Planet. A lot of it came from discussions with the Lucas licensing people.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that was developed in the process of actually writing the book. There was quite a lot of rewriting done on this book to get everything exactly right.
Okay.
I think this draft that made it to print was draft 8 or 9 or something like that. And there were significant changes between some of the drafts. And because this was the first time since Rogue Planet that we'd really seen Zona Masicot, it was interesting for all of us to combine all our different visions into one and make sure we knew exactly what we were going to do with it.
But there was a lot of description like you did in Refugee with Sela, with the Schiss planet.
Yeah, there were some descriptions that ended up not making it in. There were some that we added because we were asked to by Lucas Licensing.
Okay.
And it was because it was such a collaborative thing. It was quite hard. I mean, the way I was picturing it wasn't quite right, so we needed some tweaking, and I think we got there in the end. I think it's a wonderfully rich, complex planet.
Mm-hmm.
There's room for lots of different people's ideas. Again, I'm really curious to see where Greg takes it in his next book.
Did you went for a walk in the Australian bayous to put you in the mood for writing?
That was the hard thing, you know. I mean, I come from South Australia where there are no forests. There's hardly any trees higher than head height, and the scene where Jason and Co are running through the forest trying to find Danny is quite difficult to write when you've never actually seen a proper forest. I can't imagine what it's like to get lost in a forest. And I was trying to remember Skywalker Ranch where they have those big redwood pines and. Trying to imagine what it would be like getting lost in amongst those. Having been to Skywalker Ranch, that did actually help the writing process quite a bit.
Luke is wondering about Zona Masicot using the dark side on the Coral Skipper or be used as a super weapon against the Yuuzhan Vong. The first image, I imagine, was the Death Star. Can you give us an idea on how powerful Zona Masicot can be? How does it defend itself since our heroes were unconscious? There wasn't much description of that battle.
That's right. I mean, Zona Masicot has had enough time to build all sorts of physical weapons. I mean, it has all its shields and its hyperdrive generations. It's built into its crust and stuff like that. It has all of those, but because it's so strong in the Force, it must also have some sort of Force capability that, I mean, its capabilities must be huge.
Okay.
This is a being that's extraordinarily strong in the Force in its own way, and who knows what it could do. I mean, it can knock out a ship full of really high-powered Jedi, so who knows?
There is a mention of Zona Masicot learning from the Vong's technology. to do better ships of her own. And we also read that the Yu Zhang Vong commander got back to Shimura with a piece of the planet. Can we expect the same type of engineering from the Vong, learning from Zona Masikat?
Maybe. I mean, the Vong don't have a good history of learning from other people.
Mm-hmm.
So there is much to be revealed in the next 2 books, that's all I'll say.
Yeah.
I don't want to give anything away inadvertently.
Now, what about this dark matter? The speculation that there is a dark matter galaxy colliding with the galaxy far, far away. Is that explanation important for the rest of the series, or maybe an answer to the Yu Zhang Vong origins?
No.
No?
It's me trying to find an explanation for the trouble of navigating unknown regions.
Okay, the hyperspace anomalies and everything. Okay.
The fact that you are always dropping out of hyperspace when you go near that place.
There's been quite a bit of discussion about dark matter in magazines like New Scientist and Scientific American. Well, there certainly was when I was writing the book, and because dark matter you can only detect dark matter by its gravity, and gravity interferes with hyperdrives and stuff like that. I thought, well, it's a possibility, and there is actually a theory that there may be a dark matter galaxy interacting with our galaxy.
Yeah, but I see that you like science very much.
But that's one thing that you did really well, and that's with bringing back actual science in the Star Wars universe.
Well, I'm really glad you like that because I think science is important, and I learned a lot of science from these sorts of books, and even if it's not, I mean, it doesn't have to be. You don't have to give great big long explanations about the science, but as long as there's references to real science, then I feel good about it. And some of the dark matter stuff was actually taken out in the final version, but I feel good for making the attempt, and I mean, people who know about dark matter might go, oh, that actually makes kind of sense, and people who don't know about it may be interested in looking more into it, and there is the whole dark matter, dark side kind of thing, so I was also couldn't resist it.
Okay.
We'll come of that later. You never know.
In your book, you have like the how do you pronounce that?
Well, see, that can't be pronounced by a human mouth.
Okay.
Answer to that question.
It's the native.
So I pity the poor fellow who had to do the talking books.
Because when we look at it,
how he pronounced it was something weird like.
It's someone drowning or something.
It looks like someone gargarizing with water or something.
That's right. It's sort of.
For somebody who doesn't know what we're talking about, it's the native creature of the planet Esfendia.
Yeah, I really like those guys, and I was trying to think of a name that made them sound really alien, and I thought, okay, well, I'll just do lots of B's and P's and R's and L's and no vowels.
Did you just drag your hand over the keyboard and this comes out?
Something along those lines. There were a few different spellings before I got one that looked right to me.
Okay.
It looked good on the page. And I thought, Shane's going to see this and he's going to hate the name. Change it for sure. And he didn't. There it is, BRRBRLPP. And Shane didn't change it. He quite liked it. And I remember talking to him and saying, it's never going to get past our editor at Del Rey, and it's never going to get past the Lucas licensing people, but we'll leave it in anyway because I quite like it. So we left it in, and no one mentioned it.
No, I guess
they liked it.
Yeah, it's original, so.
Yeah, so I'm glad that it stayed because it made them sound a little bit odd and a little bit different, and they're also called the Cold Ones. Is that
Yes.
Yeah, they're also called the Cold Ones. So there is a way to talk about them without having to go.
There's a translation, and probably the guy who will translate it in the audiobook probably will call them the Cold One.
Well, the other reason why I picked that name was because they talk in trinary, and I imagine trinary sounding a little bit like a modem. Sort of that wonderful noise that a modem makes. That
when you connect,
Okay.
And that was me trying to spell that sound.
Okay.
Oh, sounds good.
Stupid, I know, but
it's a little bit harder than R2.
Exactly. Well, exactly. Here's another hard one to.
Okay.
I also wanted to see C-3PO try and say it.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a mistake or not. During the space battle over Esfendia, the Widowmaker comes out. From
I knew you were going to mention that.
No, you kind of mix up.
That's a terrible typo. That's a typo that slipped past everybody.
Okay, you change it's an error between the two ships, the Pride of Selonia and the Widowmaker. probably.
Yeah, it's purely a mistake. It's not that one's reappeared on the other side of the galaxy. Yeah, no, it's a complete mistake. And Shannon and I apologise wholeheartedly to the entire community.
But the people behind you didn't see it also, so...
no, it's one of those things that... excuse me, we have so many readers, so many proofreaders and so many editors looking at these books, and still little mistakes slip through.
You're not the only one. I think Walter John Williams, when we interviewed him, he made a mistake in a species, in the spelling or something, and well,
these things happen.
Yeah, you're not the only one. If you remember, in our first interview, I was mentioning the covers of your 3 books, and you said, okay, the first one is not a scene in either book. The second one was actually a scene from Refugee, and the third one also. But after reading the third novel, I don't remember Dan Ikuy being caught up in the Boras and Jason lighting up his lightsaber. Was that scene cut off from the original draft or something?
No, Jason didn't light up his lightsaber. I think maybe someone told the artist there was a scene with Jason and somebody, and the trees had lots of tentacles, and go away and paint to your heart's content.
Okay.
So we got something that's kind of based on a scene in the book, but definitely not exactly.
Yeah, they're at the right location, but the action isn't that
that accurate.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's not quite right. Again, trying to capture the spirit, or the scene, but not getting the details quite right.
Was there anything that you wanted to add to the book, but Lucas' book didn't approve?
There was a sequence that was cut at the beginning of the book, and it was absolutely the right thing to do. But it explained where the the droid that Kuntatol was in book 2. There was a fairly detailed explanation as to where that human replica droid.
Yes.
Yep, where the HRDs came from.
Okay.
And that went because it didn't fit the story.
Okay. And we wanted to have a surprise.
Was it a surprise? There was a surprise there. Yeah.
Because
well, the explanation that people have worked out where the droids came from anyway online. I've seen lots of people come to the same conclusions that we did, so I figured the explanation wasn't really needed. But there was one character who was made into a droid and it wasn't a major character. It was just a smaller extended universe character that we brought back for that particular scene. But he's been cut, so
okay.
I won't say who it was. I'd like to work that into a short story or something one day.
You can always suggest to Lucasfilm, Lucas
That's
Books.
right, yeah, no, we did suggest it, but I think everyone's been so busy wrapping up the series in the last year that we're sort of doing something extra, I think.
We'll give a word in for you guys about the Insiders.
Ah, great. Excellent. Very much. Insider's a great magazine.
Yeah.
We use that quite a lot for things like the chess and other data.
Would you like to see a Yuuzhan Vong action figure and maybe a Tahiri action figure being made?
Oh yeah, for sure. That'd be great.
I think you would collect them.
Absolutely. Look, I definitely get a Yuuzhan Vong. I definitely get a Nominor if you could get one. Because they're my favourite characters, Nominor and Tahiri. I would definitely buy one of each of those.
There are custom figures existing, but not commercial ones. So.
Oh, okay.
Did writing a Star Wars novel change you in any way? Maybe in your writing style or something other than that?
Certainly learned a lot about discipline in writing in that time. It was quite a task for those 18 months that we were working.
Writing a book every 3 months.
Yeah.
Well, I was. You were a bit less, but a book every 3 months is a lot of work, and I'm glad to know that I can do it.
If that is your full time, if you're writing 9 novels in 2.5 years, if that's your full time job, that is, and you have, you don't have anything else that has to take your time during the day.
Well,
see how you get into the habit.
Yeah, that's right. But there's the rub, you see. So I assumed I'd just be writing new words every day, and I was thinking 1,500 words a day, easy peasy. I'll be lying around my back, drinking mojitos, and on a sunbed. By the 3rd year, it'll be fantastic. But what I forgot was that there are several different stages to writing a book, and writing the book is only one of them. Then you've got to rewrite it. There's editing, there's publicity, there's reading page proofs, there's all this kind of stuff. And what I forgot, what I learned in the last year was that in the morning I'd be writing my 1,500 words. In the afternoon I'd be doing copy edits or rewriting, and in the evening I'd be doing publicity, or I'd be travelling. So in that 1 year I did every single literary festival in Australia and one overseas. 4 of my books came out the same month. But I thought, that's cool. Think of the publicity that will cause. What I didn't think of was that meant that I had 4 page proofs arrive on the same month that all headed back on the same day. So on top of writing 1,500 words a day, I was proofing 4 different books. So it really did my head in that last year. And I certainly wasn't bored. God, I was completely fried. It was an amazing experience because it proved to me that I could do it if I had to. It also proved to me that I don't ever want to do it again. But there have been periods, and as my career, as I become more successful, I learned that less and less of what I do is actually about the writing. There's so much other stuff to do. You know, there's going to conventions, there's meeting editors, there's writing copy for your covers, there's giving back to the community. So being on committees and writing letters to support new writers, or writing manuscript reports, or no, but it's really important because people helped me out when I started out too, and really this is my job. You know, all I have to do is write books and be engaged with the community. And if I drop being engaged with the community, then I don't know. I don't want to be that kind of writer. I don't want to be a Salinger holed up somewhere going slightly mad. I think it's good to meet young people like yourself, Emily, and who you learn from and do new things with, like this.
But we were sort of in the awkward position of, we were sort of a run up towards the end, and the ending was sort of this shifting target. I hope I'm not speaking out of school saying this. I think there are a few things that changed when we were writing the third book, or after we'd written the third book, that we then had to go back and rewrite and change, and it made for some complicated rewriting, but always for a better book, always for a better story. Particularly, I think the third one I really liked writing because I got to dabble with some older characters like Anakin Skywalker and others. You know, there was some weird little kind of sort of references to the past, which were just huge fun, really great fun, to Luke's past. So that was terrific. You know, I'm a big fan of Wikipedia. As soon as I get sucked into Wikipedia, I might not come out for hours, and I'll just skip from sort of page to page. And every now and again, I'll come across a page that is something that I've created. You know, I was stuck in a book, and that gives me an immense feeling of pleasure. I've contributed to this enormous universe.
Do you know the general guidelines of the ending?
Yeah. I mean, I've read I think it's about a 20,000 word synopsis of the last book. I read that, and it's great. Really exciting. It's going to be an absolute wonderful book. I started reading the synopsis out of curiosity and then couldn't put it down. And that's the synopsis, so the novel's going to be even better.
Mm-hmm.
I'm dying to read the last 2.
Yeah.
Really looking forward to seeing how they tie up all the threads we've left dangling.
Yeah, you know how the NGO series will end, right? You told us. So since you obviously cannot tell us the storyline, how much the Star Wars fans will be surprised? How much the Star Wars galaxy will have changed? Any possible comment on that?
The story's going to be fantastic. I can say that much.
There's a lot of surprises, I think, in store for the readers.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it surprised me, actually.
The synopsis of the last book is just terrific. I really think Jim Luceno's going to do a great job, and Greg Keyes too, the book before. It's all there. It's all been set up. It's wonderful. It's all setting up, and they'll just come along and knock all the pieces down, and people will be left going, wow, that was great.
We will say we didn't see that coming.
Maybe, until you look back and go, oh, so that's what that was referring to. Or, so that's what that means. And, big changes coming.
But, the galaxy also will have changed?
Well, inevitably, I think this sort of war, I mean, how many worlds have been destroyed, how many races have been wiped out, how many people have been killed. To leave the galaxy as it was after this would be unrealistic, I think.
Okay.
I think the following books, whatever they decide to do, could be really interesting as well after the New Jedi Order series.
I mean, the New Jedi Order series is called the New Jedi Order series for a reason. So, yes, changes afoot.
Knowing how the NGO series ends, what would you think will be the interest point of a post-NGO trilogy?
I have no idea. I was actually thinking about this yesterday, wondering where they'd go next. and I don't know. They could go almost anywhere. I had some ideas, but no, it's great. It's very exciting. I mean, it could be about the Cheers. Like, we get a lot of inquiries about the Cheers and whether anybody be writing about that race.
I guess from our point of view, it would be nice to see things like the Chiss develop further and characters like Tahiri used, just from a curious point of view to see what.
If you would have another chance to work on the Star Wars universe, what stories would you like to tell?
I would like to do something in the Chiss.
Yeah. That's the one that comes to mind for me too.
Yeah.
Chiss in the Unknown Regions.
But I'd also like to work with characters like Tahiri and Saba, if they survive.
So I'd love to see, I'd love to write the novel where Nominor poisons Mara. And that's still missing, I think.
Yeah.
And there are little gaps here and there I'd love to go back and look at.
You started work with the New Jedi Order, which you wrote with Shane Dix, and then you had this lull.
Yeah, that lull really worried me because I loved working in Star Wars and I really wanted to do more. So I'd email Shelley Shapiro, my editor at Del Rey, and say, so got any openings? I'd like to do some more. And every year she'd say, oh no, we're fully booked. And of course, what happens with Star Wars is you book up all these slots, years in advance. So, and those people who are in those slots were producing and they didn't need any more books from anybody, not from me. But I was starting to take it personally, and I was thinking, did they really hate working with me? Were those books really bad? I mean, I thought they were good books. I really liked them. So I started to get a bit paranoid, and I actually stopped emailing Shelley. And then out of nowhere, I got this email to say, look, we've got this computer game coming out. You might have heard it. It's called The Force Unleashed. We've decided we're going to do a novelization. Would you be interested? And so I shot back a response straight away saying, I'm really interested. Yes, absolutely. Sign me up. I'll make whatever space I need to make.
Well, it was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much for being with us.
But it's been wonderful fun talking with you guys. Thank you very much for having us on the show.
No problem.
Hey, it's a pleasure.
It was a pleasure.
With the rest of the series, you're going to love it.
Welcome for the fourth time, Mr. Sean William. Hi, Sean.
Hi, guys. Nice to be back.
You recently wrote the short story Or Die Trying, published in the Star Wars Insider 75, which featured Jaina. What's the story about?
The story's about, it's a sort of a sidestep from our third Force Heretic novel, Reunion, set on the world. It's the setting for the beginning of that novel, and it's about Jaina seeking the makers of the human replica droid that caused so much problems in Book 2 in Refugee.
Yeah.
And she confronts maybe not the maker or the creator, but certainly perhaps the marketer or the sales manager of the company, ODT, that manufactures these machines.
And ODT Spen, you didn't mention what the initial stands for. I suppose Onadex something?
No, Or Die Trying.
Oh.
Because the character in there says, we plan to live forever, ... or die trying. And that's where the name of the company came from.
Oh. I didn't figure it out.
No, that's okay. It was just there for us.
Okay. Was that story planned as a chapter in the Force Heretic trilogy, or it was made completely apart?
Or Die Trying was actually the opening chapter of the third book, which we ended up cutting. And I was very sad about that because it explained where the sort of human replica droids came from and some of the background for Jaina Solo. And I really wanted to show that sequence. So as soon as the opportunity to have it published appeared, I grabbed it wholeheartedly.
I'm very much interested in this kind of stuff. I do plan to live forever or die trying, and with the whole HRD thread in Refugee, it was something I wanted to delve into a little bit more in Book 3. So I wrote basically a chapter that was very similar to this in the original draft of Reunion, and it was cut for length and structural reasons, which made sense because it felt like it wasn't really part of the novel. It felt like it was a step away from the main thrust of the action, which was the Yuuzhan Vong and everything like that. So when Dave Gross, the editor of Insider, put a call out looking for short stories, I thought, here's my chance to do something with this stuff, because we had some feedback from fans saying, where do the HRDs come from? You sort of mentioned really briefly where they come from in Refugee, but it's never gone into any detail. So I thought, well, here's my chance to take all that research that I did and put it into a short story. So I dragged out the chapter off my file, had a read of it, and thought, this actually reads okay. So I bounced it across to Dave, who agreed. They bounced it off the Lucas licensing people. They agreed. So we wrote it up as a short story, and I was very, very glad they accepted it.
That's cool. How were you approached? Did the editor came to you, or you send your story to Dave Gross?
Well, Dave just sort of put a call out to all the NJO authors saying, we're starting a new year, we're looking for short stories, love to hear anything you've got. So it was sort of like an open kind of invitation to submit anything, and I'd never submitted anything to Insider before, and hadn't had any contact with Dave either. So with some nervousness and sort of thinking maybe that the slots might already have filled, I dropped him a line and said, are you interested? And he came back straight away and said, yep, sure, let's have a look.
Okay, so you
really good experience working with Dave. It was very, very smooth.
Yeah. So you weren't imposed to a strict time frame or a character, in this case Jaina and the Forced Heretic period. It was definitely up to you.
Well, it was it was up to me. I knew that the once they'd seen the story, they wanted to get it in this issue of Insider, which they had a real theme on sort of heroines from Star Wars in this particular issue. So a story featuring Jaina really suited them, and they were very keen on that. So it kind of fell into place perfectly. One of those things where everything just seemed to go right.
Yeah. There's a cool twist between the villain and Dash Rendar in the story. Yes. Why Dash Rendar, or where did the idea came up?
Well, one of the great things that I really enjoyed about working with the NJO, or in the extended universe in general, was that it's such a rich and complicated world. And whenever I was doing research, I'd come across all these really interesting threads that kind of never, or to my eyes anyway, never kind of were resolved. So the whole Dash Rendar thing was just sort of hanging there, and Yuri and all the other characters, all the HRD stories were just sort of sitting there, to my eyes anyway, feeling like they were just waiting to be used. So when I was doing all that research, always in the back of my head, I was thinking, this kind of all connects together really, really well. So it felt natural to me that they should be used. And so the idea just fell into place for this particular thread.
And I will see that fans like those kind of references, Yeah,
they do. And I love that sort of thing too. I love it when connections are made in my favorite shows and in the Star Wars universe, and it's just as much for my own pleasure as for the fans doing this sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if you're aware of the book Cestus Deception that will be coming out next month about Obi-Wan going to a planet to evaluate the new organic droid that can be force sensitive, which is
I'm not aware of that one. I look forward to reading it though.
Which is kind of the same idea that Stanton was proposing to Jaina.
That's right.
In the story, so.
And of course there was a character, a young apprentice, I've forgotten his name, who in one of the young Jedi novels was put into a droid and remained force sensitive.
Oh.
I can't remember what happened to him. He's mentioned in the end of Refugee. I'm pretty sure his name is mentioned there, but I can't remember exactly what his name was now.
The Jedi student that you were talking about is Nikos Mar.
Yes, that's right.
From the Children of the Jedi book.
Children of the Jedi. Well done.
I have a good researcher. Well, Sean, it's over. It was very short, but it was pleasant.
Lovely. Lovely to speak to you guys again. Hopefully we'll be talking again soon.
This was Sean Williams, author of Or Die Trying. You should pick it up. It's a pretty simple story, but there's some revelation between Han Solo, Dash Rendar, the villain. Thanks a lot, Sean.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.